Actions speak louder than words is a truism that I think we'd all generally assent to. And as I mentioned earlier, that notion's often been conveyed in different ways, hasn't it? Rolling up your sleeves, getting your hands dirty. Another is put your money where your mouth is. Benjamin Franklin is quoted as saying, "Well done is better than well said." Some slogans might seem to take it to the extreme. I read one that said, "I don't trust words, I trust actions." The rhetoric can kind of enter an unhelpful either or position, but we understand the sentiment, don't we? That words without action are just hot air. And so it's heartening to see that throughout the scriptures, God is portrayed not just as a God who speaks, but as a God who acts. One of the greatest God-defining moments comes at the start of Exodus when Moses is before the burning bush. Do you remember? God declares to Moses that he has seen the suffering of his people and has come down to rescue them. But this rescue mission was still going to need a body up front, Moses. And Moses, quite understandably, is a little taken aback by all this, and so he asks God, "Well, look, if I go and tell your people that you've sent me to lead them on this rescue mission, what name should I give them? Who are you?" And we get this enigmatic name, Yahweh, a name so holy it was written without vowels, a name so holy that when read, the Jews replaced it with the word Adonai, which means Lord. And so in our modern English Bibles, where God's name Yahweh appears, it's usually written as Lord in little capital letters. Why am I telling you this? Because this was a foundational revelation of God. And that name, Yahweh, is translated as I am who I am, or I will be who I will be. What does that convey? Well, at one level, God is saying, you can't pigeonhole me as one thing, I am who I am. But at another level, God is saying, I will be what I will be, in the sense that you will see who I am. In the context of the book of Exodus, Yahweh, this name, it's not a clever philosophical statement, I am who I am, about the nature of God. No, it's a declaration that the people will see that God is God by the things that God does. The people will see the works of God. They will see the terrible plagues. They will see the sea open up before them. They will know God by what God does. Our faith story is one that is more than words. And so today there are a couple of things I want to draw our attention to from the passage in Mark. First, that it's important for us to see how more than words is true in the person of Jesus, that is important for our faith and worship. Second, that it's important for us to see how that is true in our own lives, how it's important for our own growth and witness. So first of all, Jesus. In that Mark 1 reading, right from the outset, the people who heard Jesus teach sensed that there was something different in it. They'd heard many rabbis teaching before, I guess, but they looked at Jesus and they heard Jesus and they said, here is someone different. It tells us that they were amazed, astonished, because it was more than words. They said, the way he taught had authority. Notice that this is even before the man with the impure spirit comes into the picture. Even just Jesus's teaching was more than words. It had substance. It had a certain weight to it, the weight of truth. And then this troubled man walks in screaming, and there's very little exchange between them. The evil or impure spirit seeking to have power over Jesus by naming him and his plans is put in its place with a single command. Jesus says, "Be quiet, come out of him." And it does. And judging by the physical effect it leaves on that poor man, this was truly a powerful and damaging force. And now the people are not just astonished, but astounded. Why? Because it was more than words. Jesus spoke, he gave an order, and the oppressive power of evil was demonstrably broken before their eyes. And this is just one short episode at the very start of Jesus's ministry. In the passages that follow, that immediately follow in Mark there, Jesus will heal the sick, cleanse a leper, and cure a paralytic. Luke tells us that not long prior to this incident, Jesus had read in the synagogue from Isaiah, that passage that talks about God's servant bringing good news to the poor, liberty to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, freedom for the oppressed. And that day Jesus had said, this passage of scripture has come true today. It was more than words. And as Jesus's ministry progresses, it will become clearer and clearer that his ultimate mission is to suffer and die. He will say, "The Son of Man came to seek and save the lost and give his life as a ransom for many." And these two would be more than words. Jesus would suffer and die. He would give his life. The Apostle Paul will look back on the life of Jesus and say, God demonstrates his love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And just as Jesus spoke of his death, so he spoke of his rising. And they didn't get it at the time, of course, but later, as they mused over that empty tomb, as they met the risen Christ himself, they realized again that he was more than words. This is important for us, for our faith. In Jesus, we meet a God who is more than words. Yes, Jesus has some great moral teaching, but he is so much more than a radical rabbi. He's so much more than a life coach. He is so much more than a great TED Talk speaker. He is God. He is God rolling up his sleeves, God getting his hands dirty, God, Yahweh, the great I am, come down to rescue his people. There's a lovely story that John Stott mentions in his book, The Incomparable Christ. It's about an Indian chap called Sundar Singh, and he was born into an affluent Sikh family towards the end of the 19th century and was taught from an early age to hate Christianity as a foreign religion. When he was just 15, he even took a gospel and burnt it in public. But 3 days later, he was converted through a vision of Christ, and he responded to God's call and became an itinerant holy man and preacher. On one occasion, he visited a Hindu college and was somewhat aggressively accosted by a lecturer who asked him what he had found in Christianity that he didn't have in his old religion. "I have Christ," he replied. "Well, yes, I know that," the lecturer said impatiently, "but what particular principle or doctrine have you found that you did not have before?" And Singh simply replied, "The particular thing I have found is Christ." It is this Christ, this more than words Jesus, who we are pressing on to know more of. And as we do, then it's natural that this more than words good news will be at work in us. In the gospel story, the focus is really all on Jesus and the confrontation of evil and the reaction of the people in the synagogue. We're not really told much at all about the man, are we? We don't know his name. We don't know how he came to enter the synagogue at that particular moment. We don't know how it was that he was suffering from this evil spirit. We don't even know what happened afterwards. Did he become a follower of Jesus? We don't know, although I like to think he did. I wonder if those words from Psalm 111 took on a new weight for him. The Lord does not let us forget his wonderful actions. He is kind and merciful. Well, we can only speculate, but it's no speculation or exaggeration to say that the Gospels are all about lives being touched and changed by Jesus. Just as the teaching of Jesus is not abstract, so the works of Jesus are not abstract either. They're not an abstract display of power. Jesus is not interested in turning rocks into bread or getting an angelic rescue from doing free fall from the temple roof. Jesus is interested in people, in healing them and cleansing them and curing them and forgiving them and making them whole. And that work, that more than words work, carries on after Jesus has risen and ascended. I mean, think about it. What is Luke's sequel called? Yes, Acts. Acts of the Apostles. Not words, but acts. Acts of Jesus through the apostles, through the power of the Holy Spirit. And so it is that pressing on to know more of the more than words Jesus will mean that we know the reality of Jesus's actions in our own lives too. In the first instance, that will be as God acts on blockages and impediments in our own lives. It might be something quite dramatic, like liberation from an addiction, or freedom from a crippling fear, or release from destructive guilt. It might be something more subtle, through small decisions we take as a result of feeling the weight of Jesus's words when we're reading the Bible or hearing a sermon. The point is that it's not just words, but Jesus speaking to us, affecting change in us. Over the last few years, there's been a project called the Great Commission. They've been putting together a catalogue of different testimonies from people who've had a life-changing experience of Jesus. And I've used some of them in the outreach groups we've been running at church. This is Asha, and her story is amazing. She was beaten at home growing up and ran away when she was just 12. She started drinking, and by 14, she was doing drugs. That in turn led to selling drugs, and she was a seller on the streets for 12 years until one day she walked into a church. But she didn't even realize it was a church. She was there for a recovery cafe, and she'd actually come so she could sell drugs. But she says, God never let that happen. She bumped into someone from the church who befriended her and invited her to find out more about Jesus. And when she was in a group looking at the Bible, the leader told her that if she would let Jesus into her heart, she'd be forgiven for all her sins. And she says, that spoke volumes to me. I wanted to do that. And so she found not only forgiveness, but also the power to break the addiction. She says that after that day, she never once had to use drugs again. And not only that, but she was able to be reconciled with her family and with her estranged children. She starts her story by saying this: a guy that used to buy drugs off me, he was standing there and he's like, wow, you've changed so much. Our faith is more than words. And sure, We don't all have such dramatic stories to tell. But for all of us who follow Jesus, there is the offer of a life that is being liberated and shaped by Jesus's work within us. So as we draw to a close today, I hope you can see how what we've been looking at so far in this series connects together and takes us a step further. We started the race by turning to Jesus and trusting Jesus and receiving the Spirit to give us strength and direction for the race. And as we press on, we listen for God's voice. And when we hear it, we obey, we follow. And it's as we listen and obey and follow that we get to see this pressing on to know more of Jesus is not just a matter of words. It's not talking shop. It's about knowing a God in Jesus who is more than words. And as that happens, we find that we too will be putting our faith into action. And next week, Nigel will be helping us to explore what it means to press on and confront injustice and evil. But for now, let's take some time to pray. I think it's a good point to bring before God any of the blockages and impediments in our own lives that feel immovable and ask God to move them. You might like to do that on your own, or you can use the guided prayer below. Let's seek our God who is more than words.